Morning, Jim.
Good morning.
Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sana and Tom.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Dale.
Good morning, Sharon.
Good morning. Good morning.
Hey, Zari.
Hello.
Doing okay, thank you. Well, good morning or afternoon. Good afternoon to both of you. Yes.
This call is being recorded.
Good morning, everyone. This is Saturday, October 10th, 2015. We welcome you to our Bible study, and Linda is our moderator today.
All right, good morning. I'll start by reading something from Essays and Other Footprints by Mary Baker Eddy, which is from what they call the Red Book. Friends, the Bible is the book of books, the foundation truth of all things. Yea, it is the only revelator of what God is and what God does. Our topic today is like a flint. Our selected readings were from Acts 27 and 28. Our focus is Paul today. And I was looking at the first two questions and realized it might have been a little vague because on some of the other questions we're going to be answering it more specifically about when they were in the ocean and on the island. But I kind of what basically I'm asking, it says, what are the events taking place in Acts 27 and 28? When do these events fall in Paul's missionary timeline? I didn't want to get too much into the sailing and the island because we can talk more specifically then. I just was actually more interested in knowing why Paul was here and what kind of led up to these events.
Well, Paul had been all over the place preaching after he left Damascus and went back to Jerusalem. He went to Antioch, Lystra, Iconium, and he had all kinds of resistance in many places that he went. But this is the later part of what went on, because God told him that he needed to go to Rome, that he had to have him go to Rome.
In his ministry, it looks like it was 32 years, and this was 24 years into his ministry, so it was about 3/4 of the time that he had been out preaching.
He'd been doing this for a long time. And here he was arrested, and didn't look too promising as to what the outcome would be. And still a lot of Jews were really upset. They wanted to arrange for him to be crucified the same way they had arranged for Jesus to be crucified.
So I have a question. So he's before Festus takes him to Agrippa. Agrippa's the king. Now, I've been looking around and looking 26 and 25. Where is Agrippa? Is he in? He's not in Jerusalem, is he?
I don't know, Tom, you're going to have to help us out with this one.
I think he was in Caesarea.
Caesarea? Or?
Caesarea?
I think he's somewhere in Israel somewhere.
And he was King Herod Agrippa, so he's one of the Herods.
Okay.
Yes,
I'm not
it's
forgotten
great.
there were a bunch of Herods, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, there were.
The horrid Herods.
That his great-grandfather was the one who had Jesus killed, and his grandfather beheaded John the Baptist.
Oh, my.
Oh.
So there are a lot of Herods, and you didn't want to meet any of them.
Right.
What a legacy.
Well, I had read he'd gone on 5 missionary journeys, and this was the 4th one. He had written 14 books of the Bible. He'd spent 5 years in prison. And here he was, up against it all again. And he appealed to Rome because he was a citizen of Rome. So, and he felt he would get a more just trial there. He wanted to be tried in Rome, not Jerusalem, because the Jews were so adamantly against him, which he understood since he was once that kind of a Jew himself.
In 26, I think he sounded like explaining what happened in Damascus to Agrippa, trying to, just let him know what he's about now, and that what he's saying is the truth, and so on. So.
Yeah, I think that's very beautiful if you ever read where he is telling of his life story in a way, very persuasively.
Well, and in fact, after he makes this, tells this, very moving story to Agrippa. Agrippa says, listening to you, you're almost persuading me to be a Christian.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Thank you. Yes.
But then,
And I believe he says that if he hadn't appealed to Rome, that he might have been set free.
Right, that's right.
Well, Agrippa said.
That's what Agrippa said, yes, that might have been set at liberty if he had not appealed unto Caesar. He said that, Agrippa said that to Festus, governor.
Right.
But one of the things that I think we have to differentiate is that the people that were against Paul were Jews in positions of authority who were doing really corrupt things like Herod. They had sided with the Romans. And that happened also up to Constantine. So you had the Essenists, or the Jews, the Jewish people who really did believe that Jesus was a savior and what he was doing is wonderful. And you have these other renegades who were in high places.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not clear what would have happened, but he was clearly led by God to appeal to Caesar. So he was sent.
Yes, and in chapter 23, he actually says, the Lord stood by me, and the night following the Lord stood by him and said, be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome.
Thank you.
His divine destiny.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to keep in mind that this is God directing him. So, you know, there aren't really necessarily good human reasons for his doing this.
So that is part of his mission. Even though he was like in bonds and shackles and under the fire of the intense hatred, he never lost sight of why he was here and what he was doing and who he was doing it for. Because I kind of like about this thing with Agrippa, where Agrippa says, you almost make me a Christian. And Paul says, that not thou only, but also all that hear me this day. So he had a very unselfish motive driving him to tell all this story, and he wanted to include everybody in this universal message of Christianity.
Yeah, we have to ask ourselves, do we have that drive, that passion to give it out, to share it? And he didn't care about the opposition. Not at all, nor did any of these prophets. Sometimes I know, or we hear complaints about, oh, the opposition. Well, the heck with the opposition. Human mind will always oppose it.
Yeah, this is a perfect, beautiful point.
So where is Melita? Or where do people think it is?
I heard it was Malta. I read that was actually Malta.
And how long was he on Melita?
3 months, I think.
I think that's where we're going next. So why don't we go to the second question, where it says, who determined they were going to sail, and what were the results of this decision?
Centurion, Julian.
Yeah, Paul warned against taking the trip.
Yeah.
And the owner of the ship said, to hell with you, we're going anyway. And the centurion said, okay.
And it was something too. It was past the time that it was a good time to sail on the Mediterranean. The winter was coming, and I guess the Mediterranean is very difficult at times to sail on. It was interesting because I saw in one of the commentaries there is a book called The Voyage and Shipwreck of St. Paul, written in 1848 by a James Smith, who lived between 1782 and 1867. And he was a Scotsman and an experienced, yes. And he spent time out on the Mediterranean, and he actually spent time in the winter on the Isle of Malta. And so he wrote this book, but this chapter was written by the Apostle Luke, who they feel was definitely with them on this voyage. And it is one of the most descriptive passages about sailing at that time, especially in the Mediterranean. So this Scotsman wrote this book, and he knew, he studied, he was already familiar with sailing in the Mediterranean, but he certainly said that this book, the way it was written, the Acts, was a very accurate account. And also, I'm just going to add in here, because we've had people ask us about what are good books to study, commentaries and other things. Well, if you turn to 1937 College, Bicknell Young, at the end of his chapter, or at the end of his article on Sunday School, there are a list of books that were recommended by the Metaphysical College, which I'm sure is Mrs. Eddy's Metaphysical College. And they are various commentaries. And this man, a few of the books are by a Smith, which I'm sure that is this James Smith. And I did Google him, and you can still get some of these books. So I would say that these books that are recommended as commentaries are probably very excellent ones, since they were suggested reading for the Metaphysical College.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. I don't find them in my book.
In your 1937 college?
Yeah.
I can
Okay,
type
well,
up
I'll
a
have-
list if you want and then send it to you for posting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can have Jeremy post it somewhere,
Okay.
maybe on the Bible study.
Okay.
Okay.
One of the things, going back to the sailing, I thought was interesting is that this was really like human reasoning that got involved. They weren't really in an ideal place. They preferred to be somewhere else. They went for so-called expert advice. And I thought it was a really good lesson because it's very easy to go into the human intellect and human reasoning to try to solve our problems or make plans.
Definitely. Paul was serene throughout the whole thing, however, because as Gary mentioned, he felt that he was sent. Perhaps the timing wasn't so great.
Well, also, Paul was a prisoner on the ship.
Right. Yes.
But it's interesting, if you're going to read closely, it sounds like some of the, like the captain of the ship or some of the soldiers in the ship or the guards or whatever, had a tremendous amount of respect for Paul and gave him some liberties that they might not have given just any other prisoner.
Also, the centurion listened to him.
Yes. Julius.
Yeah, so here he was in a very difficult situation. He was in bonds, a prisoner. He was on a ship that was going to sail at a time of year when it was really stupid to do so. And yet, you know, he was faithful. And he was having an influence on people around him. I mean, it reminds me a little bit about the story of Joseph when he was sold by his brothers. That he made the best of a bad situation, had a tremendous influence on a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a very important point to consider, your own testimony, because it can influence people, and not just this generation, but going down through future generations. What are you? What kind of an example are you? Because as that saying goes, you might be the only testimony of God anyone will ever read or see. So important. I was reading about Wesley, who was a great minister some time ago, and he was sailing from England, I think, to the New World, and he was in the ship was just going up and down and all around, and he was just terrified. And he said that there were these German Moravians, I think they were called, and they were just also peaceful. They were sitting in a circle praying, and he said, how can you do this? We're just going all over the place. And they said, well, don't you have faith in God? Don't you believe in the teachings of Jesus? And of course, he did. He had studied it all, but when put right to it, he was terrified. So anyway, that example of those German Moravians stayed with him and changed his life significantly, because he realized the need for faith and trust in God. And so our example should be, when we're put in a difficult situation, do we push the panic button, or do we remain calm and are a symbol of God's presence and power?
I think this is Plainfield Church.
Well, thank
Here
you.
we are.
Well, it
Something
is what has made Plainfield Church what it is, and we need to remember what it is that made it what it is, and never lose it. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's really something to go through the stress of circumstances and come out the other end. A hardened warrior, better, more humble, closer to God. That's the value of the whole experience anyway.
That's the value of it. And then you come through it for one other purpose, and what is that?
Help
Serve
others.
God and
Yes. Help
Serve
others.
God.
Yes. In helping others, in sharing your testimony to encourage others.
Right.
I'm sorry to say this, but what I found interesting when I first joined Christian Science and went to church was how complacent the second and third generation Christian Scientists were. I think this is one of the points of Paul, is that he had been so brutal, and I think from my own circumstance, I think that's part of the drive, is to repent and truly repent and make amends. And while I don't always do it right, my past, because I was a farmer and my killing was of animals, and I truly feel really bad about that now. And, so I just feel I have a long way to go to make up for all that I've done in the past.
But at least you know it. A
But
lot
right,
of
and this is,
a lot of second and third generation so-called Christian scientists don't know what they don't know.
And that is
Yeah,
why
right.
we don't respect that in itself.
And it's a danger, isn't it? I mean, a lot of people
It is.
go to Sunday school, starting at the age of 4 or 5, and they hear this, they feel the truth, and they live, but many of them live a somewhat protected life, and they get to adulthood, and they haven't proven it for themselves. And they think that just because they went through Sunday school and went through class instruction that they know it all. And it's a terribly dangerous position for anybody to be in, because they don't know a darn thing if they haven't proven it for themselves, which is why we have to let our children go and prove it for themselves.
This is really true because, this is really true because, so often we believe that there's this Christian Science monarchy or royalism of the second and third generation, and we have to actually unlearn it. It's like unlearning a language that we didn't learn properly.
You're right.
That's right.
Thank you. And sometimes it can be harder to unlearn
It's really hard.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. A monarchy. I like that. They think they know what it is.
And I never know. I never know whether I should be envious of those who went through Sunday school, or glad that I didn't, because my Sunday school, the little I went to, terrorized me, and that was one reason I really didn't believe in God. But I'm grateful to say that the God I didn't believe in started with a small g, not a large g. And what I'm very grateful is that you people can recognize that, because like in my society, nobody ever could recognize what I was trying to say to them.
Well, I have just one word of caution. Don't envy anything or anybody.
Never envy anyone.
Well, see, that's what I'm learning here. So thank you.
Good.
I
You're welcome.
think Florence was trying to say something.
I was just trying to say that Paul's example of this assurance of God's care is such an example for all of us, and it really shows our growth. We can test ourselves by how we do, because our last watch, the last part speaks to it. It said that it's time to face these devastating influences, not in alarm, but with the assurance that they are powerless to defeat God's grand destiny for humanity. Amidst the harsh noises of the day, each one can, with the aid of Christian Science, walk the earth in dignity and in confidence. I think it's from Peter V. Ross, one of his God Governs the Nations. So it's an individual test as we go along.
Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Absolutely.
Does anyone else have something they want to add before we go on?
Just that Paul, the idea of being sent keeps coming back to me. This is something that Parthens raised quite a long time ago. And it has to do with, you know, what motivates each one of us. If I am going through the day feeling clearly that God is directing what I'm doing, I have to have that confidence. I have to have that faith. And it's really difficult for anything to shake me. But if I don't feel like I am being sent by God to do what it is that I'm doing today, then I don't have that closeness, and it's easy to be upset when things don't go right. We each have a mission, and it's really important to fulfill that mission and to remember, to recognize what that mission is, because that is what gives the confidence and the assurance when times get tough. You know, Mrs. Evans felt very strongly a mission. It was Mary Baker Eddy's pure Christian Science. She was able to heal, and then when the directors came at her, you know, it was upsetting. It was terribly upsetting. But she didn't give into it. She plowed on. And there was a group of people that felt the same way. And we plowed on through a lawsuit, through all kinds of nonsense. And it's what Mary Baker Eddy did, it's what Jesus did, it's what Paul did, and it's what each one of us can and has to do.
And in doing so, you're fighting a battle, but ultimately you find out the nothingness of whatever it was that was trying to rise up and defeat you. And that is handling the error, not running from it or sitting in your chair and stating truth. It is meeting it and defeating it and proving it's nothing. I acknowledge your claims, but I denounce your power, as Mrs. Eddy says. And that is what gives an incredible sense of peace. And if you don't do that and you're always skirting the issues, you are going to constantly be hounded with fear and insecurity until you meet whatever it is that you're afraid of.
Thank you. I think that's actually a perfect and beautiful lead-in, both of them, to our next question, was what had God told Paul in the middle of this lasting storm that he communicated to the rest of the people on the ship?
That no one's life would be lost. They would lose the ship, but no one's life would be lost.
And Paul, it was interesting to me that it was after a long abstinence when Paul had eaten nothing, that he had been obviously very close to God, and he was able to tell them this.
And it's a beautiful few passages. He said to be of good cheer. Here it is, in the middle of a raging storm, and he's telling them to cheer up. I mean, what? Because he had been talking to God. And I love that. And if you ever feel doubt, think of that. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve. What do you have to be afraid of when you know that? You belong to God and you serve Him. And I'm sure a lot of them, he told them now it was time to eat. They probably all couldn't eat because of all that storm going on. Yeah. But he knew they were going to need their strength, and he said they were fed bread, and they were all greatly cheered and comforted.
I think it's interesting also that when he addressed them, he, was very courteous and didn't insult them or use sharp reproofs, because he had reminded them first that, not to go on this journey, and they didn't listen.
That's very good. He could have. He could have said, man, I told you guys, and you just wouldn't listen, you dumb bells.
Nothing makes people listen like that.
Well, I'm sure it was tempting.
one great thing to me about him saying be of good cheer is he actually was on the boat with them. He wasn't, sometimes people tell you to be happy,
That's a good point.
Not your situation.
Very good point. I know. That's great. That is so good. Yes.
It wouldn't come across so well on this.
Yeah. Yeah. How true.
Now, I ask you, what do you think would have happened to that ship and the people on it if Paul was not on the ship?
They would have all died.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a hypothetical question, but it's really inspiring to see the influence that one person can have when that person is in the right mind.
Thank you.
Yes. One wise man saved a city. And that is why recently when someone was asked about, what to do in a violent situation where he said he would do something, he would attack whoever was coming at him. Well, we have to have that feeling of not letting the wrong rule the right. That was this person's point. You don't let the wrong rule the right. And once you take that position, it will heal the situation. And this isn't foolhardy. I mean, if you've got to feel sent and directed by God, which he was in that right mind that could conquer the error. So we must have this feeling. You don't just go along and be paralyzed and let everyone tell you, oh no, don't give up. It's in that Dixon letter. There's something in that Dixon letter that talks about the weak, pasty people, and the ones that for men not to feel like they want to fight, like they want to just give in. So, Bruce, tell us what you were telling me about Winston Churchill.
Yes, I did. They were advertising a book that was being written by Winston Churchill's great-grandson, who told the story of him and said that he was very much a God-fearing man, something that's not been said very well in other historical statements about him. But he also said that in England, when they were under the siege of the Nazi army, literally everyone else was ready to surrender. But Winston Churchill, he was the one who said no. Like in the same spirit, give me liberty or give me death.
Yes, never, never, never give in. He gave that stirring speech. The French already had given up. He was the one that stood, and that I've told you that what is it, Mary Astor or whoever she was,
Lady Astor.
Lady Astor, yes, who was a so-called Christian Scientist who would have given in, who was siding with all the wrong people, who thought Winston Churchill was
wrong.
Was wrong, yes.
She wanted to negotiate with Hitler.
With the devil, whom he represented at that point in time. But it was Winston Churchill, and that standing helped turn the tide and got America in the war. And of course, as my daughter-in-law tells me frequently, the Russians had a great deal to do with it too. But they fought back. They fought back. They didn't let the wrong rule the right. Nor must we, in small instances or in large. This is the fighting spirit. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's what Gary's testimony was about, too. Not wanting to face confrontation. We have to. Era's a bully.
That also is the history of this nation. Do not let the wrong rule the right. That's why we're here.
True.
That's principle.
Yes, it is. When you stand with principle, principle stands with you.
And that's why the Bible is the chart of life, because these people were sent by God. They went through all kinds of battles. In each case, the battle was the Lord's. And principle won the battle. As Florence so eloquently said on the forum.
Yes.
It's interesting to note the similarities and the differences between the experiences of Jonah and Paul. So they were both on had this awful ship experience, but one of them was shrinking from their duty to God, and the other was going forward in their duty to God. Mm-hmm. And during that horrible storm, the way they responded to it was so different. Paul is cheering and comforting the men, and Jonah's asleep underneath the deck while everything's going to ruin above him. And of course, we know Jonah suffers greatly as a result of this until he's finally awakened to his purpose and humbly willing to serve God. Whereas Paul saves both himself and all the men on board. And the men in both instances, on both of those ships, on Jonah's ships and Paul's ship, were all heathens. And Paul was able to prove to them through his actions who the real God was and what that real God was all about. So I thought that was interesting.
Thank you very much. It's a good.
And Jonah did not, because Jonah was in the wrong mind.
Yeah, wrong mind, doing the wrong thing, running from God, running from his mission.
Didn't Jesus use the term "be of good cheer"? Because that would be interesting, because Paul wasn't with Jesus when that happened.
Yes, Jesus did use that.
Mm-hmm. But isn't it the same as rejoice in tribulation? I mean, it really proves, do I know that God is here? Do I know that he's caring for me? In our own experiences, I mean, if that was very difficult for me before, but a whole lot better now. And even understand why I should be cheerful when I'm suffering. But it really does prove, yes, am I really seeing God? Am I really knowing now that he is here?
You're right. So right, Florence. That's what it means to trust, not doubt.
You know, what Bruce said is true about Winston Churchill, because I've read a lot about him, and I've wondered, I mean, he did seem like such a God-fearing man, but it never, ever is mentioned.
Not in the history books, anyway.
No, and then a lot of the things that I heard and read, they were all very complimentary about him, but not that he was God-fearing. I knew he had to have been, or he couldn't have accomplished those things. But they're trying to wipe those things out of the history books. So beware. You know, there was a movie, and I never can remember the name of it. It was produced by that Angelina Jolie, about someone who overcame tremendous Unbroken, yes. Now, I didn't see it, but my cousin saw it, and there was not one mention about God in the movie. And he was deeply religious, and there's a book by him, and that tells of it, and also a documentary which tells of his deep religious faith and belief in God. So you all be aware of this. They're trying to wipe it out as if these things, which people would call miraculous things, or changes, or people who have been able to forgive and all of this stuff, that there's no God to it. You know, anybody can do it.
Baloney.
That is very wicked.
Well, they give an example. Another example is, how many of you think, what do you think of Vincent van Gogh? Probably, you know, some crazy guy who committed suicide, you know? But he started out as a minister, preaching to poor miners in Belgium.
But anyway, these other things that were described, they send a message that's a very wrong message. And it says that if you are willful enough, you can accomplish it. That's the message that they send. Now, that's a very bad message because it's godless.
Self-will. Yep.
Yeah. It has nothing to do with self-will. Nothing at all. It has to do with the will of God.
Right.
And you know, my understanding is too, and it is true because I've read the biographies of Washington that do not mention that he was a God-fearing man. They take all of that out. So we make sure that if any of you have any contact with children, that they know the true stories. That all our history is based on God and Christ, Christianity. And it will not be wiped out off the face of this earth. It will not be, not as long as you all are here. Not happening. I saw a bumper sticker that said, people call things miracles, but all things are possible with God. I thought that was the best bumper sticker I ever saw. Yes, that's wonderful. And there are many deeply religious and Christian people in our country and elsewhere. And we will rise. We will not let the wrong rule the right. It's like they're taking God out of the schools. They're trying to take it out of history. Yes. Can't be done. No, it can't be done because it's a lie, and a lie cannot stand.
That makes me appreciate Paul more because of his strength. He was you could see why he was chosen because he did not let the wrong rule the right.
Right.
Yeah, he was a very unselfed, principled person. At first, when he was Saul and a Pharisee, he was wrongly directed. But he had some good qualities. God used them. He became a powerful force for good once he saw the truth of Jesus' teachings and his life. So it shows it can be done.
Shall we move on to the next question? This is leading into what Tom was talking about. Where did they land and what happened on this island? And did they make it to their original destination?
Just a little note, if you don't mind. I thought it was Melita, but I found out from the Pronouncing Dictionary and also from the first verse of chapter 28 that the emphasis is it's Melita.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
Oh, well, that changes everything.
I thought it was.
Got to start all over now.
Well, I thought it was Italian coffee.
Right. That's right.
Good to know our second reader's paying attention to the pronunciation.
Very important.
Yes.
Reads the Bible, doesn't
Yes, she does.
Yeah.
I have another small point. Here is Paul, God's worker, and he has saved all these people, and he's the one building the fire on Malta. How humble is that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, again, that's excellent. Thank you for serving.
Well, a lot happened on this. Oh, sorry.
Well, it was one of the greatest characteristics of Christ Jesus and of all the true prophets and his disciples, service.
Yeah, plus the natives cared for them.
Yeah, and was it Florence on the forum made the point, they're called barbaric. So that's pretty cool. They were not barbaric to them. They were loving.
They fed them.
Yes.
And
What did
probably
Paul
gave
do for
them
them?
clothes.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Go ahead, Jean.
I said the islanders fed them and clothed them and treated them very well.
Yes. And that's why, too, maybe we should question that term, barbaric.
Mm-hmm.
God create anyone barbaric? Maybe if we're seeing them barbaric, we will have that barbaric treatment.
Still false beliefs about, people.
Yeah.
And really, if we believe that way, we're really claiming it for ourselves too. One man, one God, one man everywhere. So it's not something we can
show. The barbarity was not in them; it was in the wrong people's judgment. That's where it really was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Romans, anyone who didn't fall in line with Roman thinking, were barbarians.
Yeah, and that's true today too. We think if people don't think the way we do, they're barbaric.
Look at what they did in the Colosseum. The Romans.
Oh yeah, right,
Good
right.
point.
Yeah, it's easy to see in others what we are ourselves if we're not careful.
We thought reality shows was a new thing.
What was that?
I said, and we thought reality shows was a new thing.
Oh,
right.
Comment about the.
That's funny.
Well, another thing that happened was that Paul was bitten by a viper while they were there, and he shook it off. And although it's not in the lesson this week, the people who saw that kind of wondered whether this was a sign that, Paul was a bad person and therefore he was bit by this poisonous snake. And they were waiting for Paul to die as a result of the snake bite. And nothing. And he didn't even swell up.
And then they thought he was a god.
Exactly.
What were you going to say, Jim?
I just was going to read that part, but after they looked a great while and saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said he was a god.
So even with all that adverse influence around him, Paul was still accomplishing a wonderful work. By adverse, I mean doubting or, not perhaps even knowing God or believing in the power of God, but he was still able to not suffer the effects of a viper.
This is beautiful. So through it all, he's demonstrating God's allness as an example to all these people.
Yeah.
And then he began to heal sickness. He handled the leader's father, Publius' father, who was sick of a fever and bloody flux. And Paul entered in and prayed and healed him. And then he began to heal diseases across the island.
Thank you. Wonderful. And for this, he gets, persecuted and anyone else on this?
I just want to say that the viper is a good lesson to me, that we're going along, we're really working hard, and then something else happens. But don't be dismayed. I'm learning it, and thank you.
That is great, Shardy. That is an important point. Here, after all of this, he comes through the storm, all of that, and my goodness, he gets bit by a viper. I mean, you could say, oh my gosh, what else?
this is my payment?
Yeah, I mean, he could have just thrown up his hands and, oh, forget about it.
That's a great point. It can throw you off, honestly, because you think you're doing everything, and so where is this God? You know.
That's an excellent point, Chardell. Really good.
Really.
Because sometimes that does happen, and I'll hear it. You know, you've come through so much, and then something else happens, and you think, geez.
And I'll even say this: it's been my observation that the people who are doing the most good come under the greatest attack, and it'll come to them in ways that it comes right out of right field, and it comes in ways to try to discourage them. When you are on a mission, stuff's going to come up. And the whole purpose of it coming up is to try to discourage you from continuing your mission.
And that is why, and this is such a key point to all of us here, if you can impersonalize it and see it as that. It's error trying to get you to stop your mission. What God is telling you to do, that's all it is. It might wear a face or a disease or a this or a that. But if you impersonalize it and realize it's none of those things, it's animal magnetism coming to you for life, you will get beyond it, as Paul did. If you think, oh my gosh, what have I done, or why is this happening to me, or you sit under the oak tree and start ruminating, you'll get cooked. It's never what it seems to be. And if you keep walking and trusting God, you will walk through it, whatever it is. And I know, would say all of you have probably proven that in one way or another, and will continue to prove it. Just like walking through the magician's cave and the psychologist and the magician. We'll try to get you to stop. It'll come up in all different ways and forms, but you just keep going, knowing that Emmanuel, God with us.
And one of the favorites of the devil is to use one of your family members to you with something that will get you really, really upset.
Absolutely.
Yes. Usually right before a service, or, you know, you're all ready to give a testimony, you're feeling it, and then some ridiculous thing happens. It would just try to get you so upset. And if you see it again, it's not them, it's animal magnetism trying to trip you up. It's a wonderful lesson.
Or just when you've really done something, you've demonstrated something good, and you're feeling like, yes, this one, you know, I saw through it, and then comes the other one in another form.
So do you have any advice on how best to handle that situation?
Just what we said.
Just what we said. God, what would you have me to do today? If you are doing what you genuinely feel God wants you to do, and if you feel strongly about doing it, you'll say, aha, the devil, you're not going to get me this time. I have work to do for God.
And don't be impressed by it, and don't become engaged in it. Disengage. Because if you get engaged in it and get all wrapped up into a scenario, it'll grow bigger. If you say, oh no, this is just to prevent me from doing what I need to do, and turn from it, as Mrs. Eddy says in Unity of Good, you will pass by it. And after you've accomplished whatever it is you need to do for God, your mission, whatever it is, you will find the problem has gone. It's an illusion. It always is. And this is what's so wonderful about our science, and so wonderful about this work for church, because it becomes more and more obvious to you, and you begin to see it more clearly and handle it more quickly and decisively.
No matter what form it takes.
No matter what form it takes. Go ahead. Mrs. Eddy says in watching prayers and arguments, this is not my pain or error. It's an attack on my Christ. And that just shows us, uncovers what it really is.
And try to remember that each trial makes us stronger.
Yes.
No, it doesn't make you weaker. No, I
Yes.
can't do it. But just that you have to remind yourself.
That's right.
I don't want you to remember it.
That's right, and that's a good point too. You get stronger, because otherwise error just defeats you. I mean, in any of these points, if Paul had given up, he would have been defeated in a lump of mush. But of course, he didn't, and so must we never. You're stronger than before the fall. Come out the victor, always the victor, never the vanquished.
I know for me, knowing that it's coming, you know, being taught here that it is going to be coming your way, then you just see it and you're like, okay, you know. But I know on Wednesdays a lot of things ends up happening and just, okay, it's just a Wednesday thing. Whatever, you know, just keep going.
Oh, I know, Wednesdays and sometimes Sunday mornings or Saturday nights or when you're preparing, you know, readers will find it and anybody in this work will find it. Wednesday night readers, or just when you're ready to give a testimony or you're going to write a lesson, all these things, all this opposition will come. I mean, sometimes you can almost laugh at it. It'll first maybe come mentally, you don't want to do it, and if you defeat that, then it will become maybe some physical thing. But there again, do not be impressed with it. Animal magnetism wearing a face. You won't be deceived by it.
Mrs. A talks about this. She says, our work is not humdrum. It is repeating and defeating, repeating and defeating. This is the precept upon precept.
Well, thank you so much for repeating. And now I think this goes back to what I said about second and third generation, because when I would bring up a question like this in the other settings, it was, you know, there was absolutely no explanation. So now I'm wondering if they just didn't have that because they weren't really, you know, opposing error enough to be of worry to error to come after them. And hearing you folks saying how much it happens on certain days. So I really appreciate your clarification on this.
When shortly after we were excommunicated from the board and going through our law case, a fellow named Reg Carey befriended us, and Reg had been head of security up in Boston, and was a very fine Christian Scientist, and he knew all the directors very well because he was in charge of security up there, and he had been warning them about what some of the things they were doing. And when we first met Reg, and we were talking about our situation, one of the things that he said that helped me a great deal was, in talking about the directors in Boston, he said, they don't know the science. They just don't know it. And they're the directors of that church. So it was very helpful to us to see that it was people in positions that didn't have a clue what Christian Science really was. And that was the problem.
And you know, at that time I used to wonder about that. I thought, gosh, how could they not know the science after all these years being in science? But finally I realized I didn't know the science either. And then I got it. And oh yeah, they don't know the science. I mean, I thought I did. I read it. I tried to be a good person, but I didn't know the science. So now I understand what he was saying. And that's true of all these little ladies in some of these little churches. I mean, they don't know the science, and that's why they can't explain anything. Until you go through stuff, you don't know the science. Nor do I think would footsteps or precepts or any of those books be very valuable to anybody. They'd just be words. Once you're living it, you say, wow, this is great. I really love it. I'm really being helped by it, because you're living it and you need it. As well, of course, as Science and Health opens up, and the Bible as it is this morning.
Thank you.
Welcome. So where are we? Did they arrive at their destination?
I thought it was beautiful. I really think actually the whole discussion really answers the question what it means to say it, set your face like a flint. If anyone wants to add something, then certainly they're welcome to.
Yes, because when you're sent by God, you don't dare deviate left or right.
Yeah,
May
I
I
read.
read something? I'm sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
found this. My face like a flint, like the prophets. The servant will endure with great determination.
Yes.
And Linda, what you posted on the forum too, Mrs. Eddy, in precepts, I think you got it out of. She was resolute. She was fixed with a purpose. That's it.
Yes. And we must be also. This is the commitment. I read this is on a little lesser level, but it's true. It's real winners don't put time limits on their commitment. They are committed with no conditions. And when they begin what they have made up their minds, when they begin, they have made up their minds also to finish. So, no time limits, no whining, no whatever. Our faces are set like a flint.
And each one of us has a mission. And each one of us, mission is different. I mean, none of us ever has to do what Mrs. Eddy did. None of us ever has to do what Paul did. But we each have our own place in this world and in this mission. And we can fill it as faithfully as Paul filled his.
That is the satisfaction and peace and joy to your life, like nothing else does.
Like different missions for one purpose, one holy purpose.
Right.
Yep.
One holy purpose. And no one can tell you what your mission is. Only God can.
And that's the value of a good church, is to remind us of that periodically.
I was just going to add that Paul did make it to his destination. That's the last citation, Acts 28:30, where he dwelt 2 whole years in a hired house. He rented a house. But it took 3 months and another trip.
I know. I felt so happy for him. Finally, he had a place and was able to teach and preach the gospel. He did have a guard with him, but no one forbade him after all he'd been through.
Well, thank you, everybody, for this beautiful Bible study.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
You all.
See you tonight.
Did he really not make
Thank you.
this destination?
Yeah, he did make it.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Oh, no, we said that. We
I
said
misheard, but I thought he made his destination.
Yeah, we said he did.
Oh,
Linda
okay,
said
sorry, I misheard.
It's okay.
That would be that. Yeah, you got it to Rome.
Right. It has a happy ending, Tom.
And we recorded it. It was recorded.
Unlike Van Gogh.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a lovely day, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye all. Bye all. Bye, sorry.
Bye, sorry, Nissa.
Goodbye.